So yeah, and all my kids. Yeah.
Okay, folks, let's get started. Take your seats. I'm David Rain. I'm the chair of the geography department. It's my great honor to welcome you all to the first annual Joe Dymond Scholarship event. Joe is still very near and dear to all of us in the geography department, as a colleague, as a mentor, as a professor, as family members. I'd like to introduce some of Joe's family. Over here on the left, Maureen, right? And kids Jose and Madison. Mom Phil and sister Lynn. And did I forget anyone? Anyone else want to?
She's on her way.
She's on her way. Someone else is on their way. Okay. So this is about, it's partly about remembering Joe, but also moving his legacy forward. And so the whole idea of this is to support students in doing what Joe, I know, and we all know, love to do, which is travel, do research, find out interesting things about the world, and come back and tell all of us. And so I'm not going to talk long. I just want to set this up so that we can show off the student work, these three seniors and geography majors. I do also want to acknowledge our deans in attendance, Paul Welbeck and John Philbeck from Columbia College, and other faculty from geography and other students. So why don't we get started? And Mike, are you first?
Yeah, thank you so much. And I feel like we can't belabor this enough. Joe was, a passionate educator. I've never seen somebody so enthusiastic about life in general, right? He had sort of a puppy dog enthusiasm for life. He wanted it all, and he wanted it like right now. And I miss having him in the department, of course. But miss traveling with him, and I think we all feel a hole in the department without him. So I'm actually here to introduce Kai, one of our scholars. Kai is a double major in IR and geography, and because of this award, was able to travel to Amsterdam to take some classes on basically sort of new urbanism and have a better understanding of how transit is handled in Amsterdam and in Europe in general, and particularly focusing on sort of bike transport, which is the new thing. And I guess you guys have probably I see a lot of Marylanders here, right? Come into the city every once in a while, you probably see a lot more bike lanes, which is great. And I think that one of the things I saw in Kai sort of immediately and that came through in his application was just sort of the passion and enthusiasm for learning something new, traveling, going abroad. And it was clear that he was going to make full use of his time and really get something out of it. And I'll call up Kai here to give you your plaque here in a second, but no, come on up. Sorry, I'm just confusing things. So bear with Kai, right? I think all of our students are sort of new to public speaking, so be patient with them. But yeah, Kai, it's a great honor to have you join us today. Yeah. Never found it out. Did I do it right, Dean? I feel like you guys have more flag experience. Okay. Do we have to queue up? Oh, I got it. It's okay. You got it.
Oh my gosh. I think
Is this?
Okay, thank you so much for that. And I want to start off by saying thank you to the Dymond family and to the geography department for making the travels that I did this summer possible. Without your support, I really wouldn't have been able to do it. For context, last semester I was working 2 jobs, and the scholarship funds really helped me actually be able to attend this. So I really want to say thank you to the department and to the Dymond family. So without further ado, I'm going to get started. So this summer, I had the opportunity to travel to Amsterdam in the Netherlands to attend the Planning the Cycling City summer course at the University of Amsterdam Graduate School of Social Sciences. Quick overview of what I'm going to be talking about today. I'm going to give you an overview of what I did in the course, what it was about, and then I'm going to really dive into like what I took away from the course and how I want to apply what I learned to whatever local context I find myself in, and in this case, DC. So this is the cohort in my class. We had a diverse array of students from many different continents. We had students from China, Iran, Spain, Australia, me representing the US and Japan. And here is our professor Glazer. She's actually an American. But yeah, it was a great array of students. Many of them are professionals currently, architects, engineers, activists, parents, and so on. So we stayed in Diemen, which is a suburb of Amsterdam. Here's my bike on the entrance to the neighborhood. And this is to give you an idea of what our day-to-day kind of looked like. After class, we'd gather in the common areas. Some of the older students would teach the younger students some old school mapping techniques and like how to read cycle maps. So that was just to give you an idea of what student life was like. So the course was 3 weeks long. We had about 20 students, and the course followed a flipped classroom approach with an emphasis on experiential learning. So essentially, most of our learning took place outside of the classroom. We partnered with the Dutch Cycling Embassy, the Urban Cycling Institute, and the Urban Mobility Futures Institute at the university. And the classes were structured with, every class was essentially a new guest lecturer talking about a different area of urban cycling. So with experiential learning and urban design, this is a picture from the Office of Planning, the people who plan Amsterdam. They hosted us for beers after class to show us this intersection that we studied and some of the innovative designs they're using. I just want to point out real quick, right here, we have something called a French fry design. It's the only one in the world that does this, where they had so much bike traffic and it was causing congestion. They needed to figure out a way to use the same amount of space, but to find a way for people to flow better. So they leaned on a sociological approach to see how people interact with one another instead of how they interact with the environment to solve the problem. So the intersection starts with a wide entrance on each side, and then it narrows as it goes, and cyclists have to negotiate with one another directly in order to cross. And they found that the volume of people actually increased by doing something seemingly contradictory. Instead of straight lines, it narrowed. This is a Fietsstraat or bike street, also known as a cars are guest street. So this is something that my professor actually planned this street. It goes right next to the university. The entire street is red to signify that it's meant for bikes. It's in order for a Fietsstraat to work, we learned that there needed to be a critical mass of about 15 to 17,000 cyclists a day occupying the space to impose a psychologically onto drivers who use this regularly, that this street is owned by cyclists and pedestrians and it's not meant for cars. And these are just some quick highlights. So then peer-to-peer teaching was a big component of the course. Here, this was actually in the Office of Planning. Each student, including myself here, I talked about my hometown in Kanagawa, Japan. Hi, Dad and Kento, my brother is watching right now. We taught each other. So I learned about, like the guy next to me, his name's Mohammed. He's a transit planner in Tehran. So I learned about how they plan in Iran, how planning is done in the UK, Australia, and so on. And so I also wanted to talk about exploration and experience. So here we have public housing. So most of my time was spent outside of the classroom, exploring and applying the principles I learned in the classroom. So here we have public housing and a bike lane that goes through the building. Like this is how integrated the system is. This is how dedicated they are to creating a network. On the right, we have a picture of my mom who visited from Japan to see my father as well, who lives in Europe. And as you can see, like she was able to participate even though she had a broken foot because the cycling infrastructure was good enough for me to feel comfortable riding her tens of kilometers around the city as my cargo, I guess. So, yeah. We also talked about climate resiliency and other forms of design. So here, this is in Rotterdam, which is a city next to Amsterdam. It's actually car-centered, and they're trying to transition. If you look at the city, it looks a lot like many cities in the US originally, but they've really made an effort to incorporate livable and human-centered design. So here we have a skate court in a public housing complex, a mixed-use public housing complex that also serves as a flood retention area, and also just bike-friendly bridge design. There's also accessible recreation. Everything is not just jobs or education or whatever we talk about when we talk about transit, but recreational space was easily accessible. This was during the heat wave that hit Europe this summer. Everyone was out by the river, enjoying, like in Amsterdam, it wasn't too bad. So everyone was enjoying the warmth, jumping in the river, barbecuing, really just relaxing. And everyone got there by bike. I didn't see a single person arrive by car. And this was like 15 kilometers outside the city. Now, I want to talk about some of the principles I learned that I really want to drive home here. Imagine a healthy ecosystem. Imagine flowers, trees, predators, and prey that are all pieces of a puzzle that makes an ecosystem whole. Now, I want you to imagine a vibrant city. What makes it livable, and how can we measure this? So this is a concept I kind of came up. This is a group presentation I did as part of my program, and I'm kind of readapting it here. But the idea I came up with was an umbrella species, which I thought of because of my intro to GIS class I took here, where we learned about umbrella species to map habitat conservation efforts. So in conservation science, the health of an ecosystem can be measured by an umbrella species. An umbrella species like the gray wolf in parts of North America indicate the health of an ecosystem. The gray wolf is reliant on its reciprocal relationship with its prey and its environment. If the wolf is doing well, you can assume for the most part that the ecosystem as a whole is doing all right. Bicycles are the umbrella species for livable cities. The components of a city's urban and social fabric support the existence of accessible and widespread bicycle usage. Just as the gray wolf indicates the health of an ecosystem, the proliferation of bicycles indicates how livable a city is. It's not about the bike itself, but all of the factors that make biking in a city comfortable and possible. So I'm gonna just briefly cover the components. So, of course you need mixed use, residential with commercial, active ground floors, dense urban landscapes, lively streets. Density makes biking possible. Amsterdam, in Amsterdam, it houses many, many people, but they do it without making it feel very crowded. Historic buildings are next to some audacious new buildings, and density doesn't have to be boring. Parks, streets, and squares are all harmoniously integrated to create an interesting urban fabric. Proximity, so everything is close. thanks to the other principles of mixed use and density, you have access to schools, stores, parks, everything you could really need. And of course, nature is an integral part of this, making sure people have access to green space. It's good for health, it's good for the environment, it's good for the animals and plants that live in the area. And connected to nature and everything I've already talked about, you have livable streets. You need active streets that promote socializing, that promote interacting with nature. Yeah. And of course, you need green streets. These are all connected. I know it sounds very similar, but green streets are pleasant. Like a street being pleasant to use is a huge component of good urban planning. And of course, public space weaves a community together and strengthens its social fabric. Going out, makes you connect with people and places, and active transport helps alleviate issues related to obesity, pollution, traffic congestion, isolation, and much more. And of course, public space, a community weaves its social fabric through public space, and it allows us to inhabit the city together and connect with one another. And these are some pictures I took. This was my bike commute to and from school next to this canal. But you can see they separate the bike lane from the road. They plant local wildflowers to support pollinators and to reduce groundwater runoff. And this is actually on the, I believe, dike of the canal, like the edge. Yeah. And so also bicycles are fun. Kids playing in the streets are an indicator of community safety, trust, and freedom. And the Netherlands is ranked as having the happiest children in the world, I believe. And biking is actually a big part of it because children, I think teenagers and children make up to 50% of total bikers in the Netherlands, meaning they are able to go to school, go to visit their friends, explore the city, get lost, and build a sense of confidence navigating by themselves. And of course, this connects to independence, giving children life skills and confidence. And it also gives caregivers freedom and peace of mind, knowing that their children will be safe when they go out and that they don't need to drive them everywhere. And of course, autonomy for the elderly and for people with disabilities. When you're 80 years old, would you prefer to get around on your own or have to depend on others? In the Netherlands, the elderly are famously known to be independent. And a big part of this is due to the cycling culture that promotes physical activity and mental wellness. Traffic calm streets, cycle paths, and sidewalks, and a mix of destinations support autonomy among everyone. And now I want to get into the equity component that I learned about. So I want to differentiate between equality and equity in biking sense. So equality would be giving everyone the same bike, basically. Equity is meeting people where they're at and giving them the resources that they need. So we had a big focus on gender equity. We studied care trips. So if you plan around caregivers, the routes that, for example, mothers take on a day-to-day basis when you're planning a bike route or a bus route, if you're just trying to decide to change where it goes, in the end, everyone benefits. Transit and our infrastructure has predominantly been planned around men going to work, to and from work. It doesn't really take into consideration trips for grocery shopping, for dropping off the kids at school, for going to the park. It's currently our infrastructure is planned to get from home to work. That's basically it. Inclusivity. So a big part of our course was working with Mama Agata. She is a Ghanaian immigrant, and she started a bicycle training program for migrant and refugee women. She actually has a documentary that we watched with her called Mama Agata. Would highly recommend watching it. She empowers participation in cycling, which means participation in Dutch society, because Dutch citizenship, I'm not talking about like official citizenship, but to be part of society, biking is such an integral part of it. And if you don't know how to bike, you don't have easy access to grocery stores, you don't have easy access to transit stations, and so on. I will also note she's doing a fundraiser. She needs an e-bike. She's kind of aging to the point where she can't necessarily bike on a regular bike anymore. So she's asking for help with funds for getting an e-bike. So again, just to sum up that bicycles are an umbrella species, and it can be used as a tool to evaluate the health of an ecosystem, in this case, cities. Cycling cities are not about the bicycle itself or the infrastructure that supports it. It's about the thread that weaves all of the components of a compassionate society to build livable cities for the future. And I just want to quickly, before I apply this to the local context, I want to give credit to my group members who helped make this portion of the presentation. It was a group effort and wonderful people. Yeah. So the future of cycling. There's no silver bullet, and intervention matters. We need to shift our narrative away from seeing biking not as an alternative, but as the connective tissue of cities. We need to facilitate and not dictate. And I also want to say we studied city street experiments, and they tend to be pretty successful. I mean, it depends on the local context, but a big example is Times Square in New York. They cut off in big sections car traffic as an experiment, and then people liked it. So they decided to keep it. And it became a more permanent feature of the city. So this is a great way to enact change. It reduces emissions. We looked at how, bikeonomics and walkonomics, so the delivery systems, moving away from trucks and maybe moving towards a more dispersed cargo bike system. It's coming up in Amsterdam, where deliveries more and more are being done by cargo bike instead of by trucks. It's also just better for noise pollution and whatnot. And it's actually cheaper in some cases for both businesses and consumers. And architecting interaction, design can promote interaction or isolation. If you drive in a car, you're isolated from everyone around you. If you're on a bike, you're making eye contact, you're negotiating space. So lessons for DC. We need to think about who we prioritize on our streets and why we prioritize what we do. Currently, I would argue that we prioritize commuters coming from the suburbs to work in DC, especially in the downtown area. Of course, the pandemic is changing this. We need to center equity in any changes we make. We need to recognize the history of displacement that has historically been associated with the urban planning field, especially in DC. Concerns to gentrification, listening to community needs. I know in parts of Southeast that a lot of people don't want cycle paths. They need better bus service because that's what people actually use. So bikes aren't a end all be all for everything. And synergy with transit systems. So like first mile, last mile. How do you get the bike to the station, ride the transit, and then get off with your bike to get your last mile so you don't need a car? And I will say, finally, my last note, change is possible. Amsterdam used to be car-centered in the 70s. There are pictures of just congestion throughout the city. And granted, the urban skeleton is different from most US cities. It did take, in many cases, violent protests of mothers, of anarchists, of squatters, demanding that their streets be safe for their children. There was something called the Kindermord movement, the Stop Killing Our Children movement, because so many children were being killed by traffic violence. So it takes organizing, it takes just coalition building, and it takes a lot of time, but it is possible even here in car-centered USA. So again, just to sum up what I learned, general overview of the course, umbrellas for the bike as an indicator of city health, the future of our infrastructure, and how we can apply these lessons to DC. Thank you, and I'll take some questions. Any questions? Yeah.
See a lot of road rage, especially.
Yeah, so this is actually a big thing, bicycle rage. So in the Netherlands, there's a term called MAMIL, M-A-M-I-L. It means middle-aged man in lycra. So lycra is like the spandex that a lot of bikers will wear. So MAMILs are an actual term that we used in discussions, but it's talking about who even within bicycling, who gets priority? Typically mammals are speeding down these cycle lanes that are actually, most of the people who use it are day-to-day people, like, moms with children in it, their baskets are dads, or just kids going to school. And when you have people yelling at you to move out of the way because they want to speed through, it kind of, there's tension there. So they are actually trying to design like intercity bike highways that promote that kind of cycling to meet the recreational needs of both mammals and non-mammals alike. Yeah.
You spoke to children in car accidents.
Mm-hmm.
How about bicycle accidents?
Yeah, so bicycle accidents do still occur, and some of them can be fatal. Are you referring to like bicycles hitting people? Okay.
Or hitting each other?
Hitting each other. So actually, this is a really interesting thing when we studied intersection design. When you look, I didn't include it here, but in some intersections, they removed all traffic lights, including for car traffic. And what they found is crashes, the frequency of crashes went up, but the severity of crashes went down because people are more cautious when you're not being told what to do, you have to look and negotiate. And they found that when cyclists crash with each other or with pedestrians, it's typically no injury or very minor injury compared to when you completely segregate different modes of transit, like cars are here, bikes are here, pedestrians are here. There tends to be more fatalities. So I guess bike crashes aren't really as much of a concern because it's a lot slower. There are still some fatalities, but nowhere near what automobiles cause.
If some of the cyclists speed,
Mm-hmm.
are there any regulations about speeding?
Yeah, so they actually have bicycle speed limits. And the infrastructure actually it's contradictory because the infrastructure promotes seamless bicycling. So when you're in the busy streets on the cycle lane, they have sensors in the ground as you approach an intersection that as you go over it, it'll switch the light to green for you and stop car traffic. So in the 10-kilometer or 15-kilometer commute I had, sometimes I would never stop. And I'd cross 6 canals, many intersections. But the system was made to prioritize people like me. And there were posted signs like, don't go faster than 20 kilometers an hour on a bike. And there are bike police. And they are pretty vigilant, I will say. Yeah.
Sense of the percentage of people that ride in the city a day versus drive. My experience of Amsterdam, it seems that there are more cyclists than.
Yeah, I think if I remember correctly, don't quote me on this, it's like 60 to 80% cycle every day. And there is disparity depending on what neighborhood you go in. In Southeast Amsterdam, where Mama Agata lives, where it's majority immigrant, car usage is actually higher than bike usage. There's also perceptions about status. Many immigrants come from countries where cycling is seen as a low class thing to do, whereas car ownership is seen as something that's aspirational. So it's like, if you move and you have resources, why would you buy a bike if you could buy a car? And what's contradictory is the Netherlands is one of the best countries, has some of the best car infrastructure in Europe. But it's just segregated from bike infrastructure. So they have world-class bike infrastructure and world-class car infrastructure. They have the biggest highway in Europe, I believe. Yeah.
How about motorbikes?
Motorbikes, this is also a big issue. They can ride on the cycle lanes. Mopeds can. Motorcycles, I didn't really see many of those, but if there are, they typically stay in the street. Yeah.
From what I understand, gas is really expensive there.
Yes.
How does that impact the bike usage versus the car usage?
I'm sure it does impact it. Like, I will say though that typically it's more convenient to just bike than to use your car. Like, it's just like a convenience thing. They've made it so they've designed it to be, they disincentivize car usage actively. They want you to bike, and as they disincentivize car usage, they actively promote bike usage. So what's funny too is when people talk about the time it takes to get somewhere, they'll be like, oh, I'll be there in 10 minutes. 10 minutes by what? In the US, you might think driving or walking. in Amsterdam, they assume biking. Yeah.
Great job.
Thank you.
Very good.
Comment and relate this made myself and Joe Dymond and we were in an interesting day in Amsterdam. I went to a conference. I remember it was the first time I'd seen this kind of cycle culture, and I think I made a comment more likely to ride a bicycle than a car.
Yeah.
And we almost did a few times. And it upset some of these mammals because they should find it, or they give it glare. I'm like, sorry, we weren't realizing the amount of traffic that was by this bicycle. And we experienced a little bit of it. We almost got to get a bicycle, but it's our fault that we're not one doing this.
Yeah. Well, although we did notice in the program that pedestrians are really treated like second-class citizens on the street. It's actually a big issue. Is you look at the cycle infrastructure and the road infrastructure, and then the sidewalk is like this big in some places. And it's, if you have a wheelchair, for example, I saw a lot of wheelchair users using the cycle paths, but like my mom stayed downtown in an area that wasn't as accessible, and it was a little challenging to dodge the bikes. So I guess the point I want to make is that it's not perfect. The Netherlands is not a utopia. I learned, I could get so much deeper into it, but like, you see the flaws. There's so much more work to be done. But they are, like, I would say 40 years ahead of where we are right now. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
So how does weather impact?
Yeah. So this is a question that we ask them because it's, it's one of the rainiest countries. People bike when it rains because it's just the easiest way to get around. They have umbrellas that are aerodynamically designed, so you can like hold it while you go, or people wear raincoats. Again, with the sensors in the ground, when it rains, they place even more priority on bicyclists. So you don't have to wait in the rain at a red light. You can just get from point A to point B as fast as you can.
Is there snow? I don't know much about that.
Not as much, I don't think. And when I was there, it was during the drought, so it rained once, and I got to experience what riding in the rain there was like. It wasn't that great, but if it means that you have a livable city, and every now and then when it rains, you just get a little wet, I would take that over planning for cars.
Are there inspections of bikes, someone checking the tires? Nope.
No, it's all very like ragtag, like do it yourself. Yeah. So. Awesome. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
My name's Dr. Kelsey Nyland. A much younger version of me, an undergraduate version of me, is in several of the photos with Joe. I nagged at him a lot. I knew about that really cool boat share membership. I was like, come on, please. What do we have to do to get out on the Chesapeake? Let's go. And honestly, it didn't take a lot of work. Didn't take a lot of convincing. Very fun times. But today, I have the very exciting pleasure to introduce Pauline Mnev. She is a undergraduate double majoring in geography and environmental studies. She's also completing 2 minors in GIS and data science. Yeah, it's a lot. I first met Pauline when she took my course in geomorphology. And this was in the spring of 2020. It was a very fateful time for all of us. And despite the pandemic, despite a less than graceful transition to online on my part, she really stood out in the course for a number of reasons. She's very impressive in terms of quality comments during class, but really what stood out to me most was how she conducted herself in group research, so working in a team with others. In addition to her coursework, she's interned at Blue Raster, which is a geospatial mapping company that's local. She's also participated in the mapathons. So these are humanitarian mapping events held in our department. And she's an avid backpacker with GWU Trails, our university outdoors club. Paulina embodies the scholarship, interests, and I would say especially your kindness that I know Joe really appreciated as much as I do working with you. And it's because of all these traits that my colleague, Dr. Vera Kuklina, she extends her congratulations. She's on her way to Norway right now. But she and I were so excited to hear that you want to be involved in Arctic research. This is why last year we very quickly jumped at the opportunity and hired Paulina on a recently funded grant from the National Science Foundation. Needless to say, she continues to impress us. She's very diligent. If you suggest it, she goes and does it. So very driven, and she's generated a number of truly beautiful map products. So it's exciting to say, this isn't going to be reiterating travels she's done yet. We ran into some issues with, of course, COVID and logistics of very small remote Arctic communities, but Paulina is going to be traveling with our research team early in the spring. It's now looking like logistics have moved it to a February or March trip to 2 villages in remote southwestern Alaska. Villages of Nikolai and McGrath. It's very exciting. She'll be able to join us. She will be partially funded by our logistics, but it's this scholarship that makes it so that she can join us, and she will be properly outfitted for those very short early spring days, really, really cold weather, and some snowmobiling. Very exciting. So with that, I'd like to present your award and invite you to tell us about your independent research.
Thank you, Professor Nyland, for that introduction, and I'm very excited to share what I will be able to do and what will be possible, all thanks to the generosity of the Dymond family and the opportunity presented by the Geography Department. And as Professor Nyland said, over the past year, I have been a student researcher on a project run by Drs. Nyland and Kuklina, funded by the National Science Foundation. The title of this project is Frozen Commons, Change, Resilience, and Sustainability. It is a multidisciplinary project, and it is a big collaboration between these universities here, including George Washington, Alaska Pacific, Alaska Fairbanks, University of New Hampshire, Arizona State University, and the University of Northern Iowa. The goal of this project is to examine the use of managed resources in these frozen Arctic landscapes. It is something that we refer to as the frozen commons. You've probably heard of the tragedy of the commons, and the idea is basically that herders are using a pasture of land for their cows, and every herder is only thinking about themselves and their own cows, which leads to overgrazing and overuse of this land. And this leaves the land depleted and the cows hungry. Sort of similarly, we're looking at how shared ice, snow, and permafrost resources in these Arctic communities are being used and adapted to climate change. For example, these shared resources could include those snowmobiling trails, sled dog trails, ice cellars for storing food, which are all practices used in the villages that we are studying. And let me tell you about these study areas. The communities we are studying are in Nikolai and McGrath in southwestern Alaska, as seen on the far left, your right. And also, initially, we plan to study Chersky and Pokhotsk in Russia, but for obvious political reasons, I will not be traveling to Siberia. But with this travel scholarship, I will be able to visit the villages in these Athabascan villages in Alaska. And these villages are small. In the 2020 census, the population for McGrath was 301 people, and the Nikolai population was 89 people. And these communities are mostly made up of mostly indigenous Alaskans. We are particularly interested in examining these Arctic villages and how they react to climate changes and how resilient they are in adapting resource management strategies. These Arctic communities are disproportionately affected by climate change as the temperatures there are rising at faster rates than the rest of the world. So as you can see in this climate graph that I have made in Nikolai, there's not much of a climate study or record at all, as there's a lot of missing data. But in the McGrath graph, you can see the red line trending upwards, which indicates rising temperatures. And when we go to these communities, we will be able to install environmental and climate monitoring systems, which will enable us and also the communities to monitor the temperatures and the climate in this region, so that we could suggest, or they could suggest, ways that they could manage and share resources in a way that adapts to the rising temperatures, changing climate, and changing environments. So to prepare for this field work that we're going to be doing in cold, frozen, snowy Arctic Alaska, we chose to go to sunny Phoenix. And I'm so grateful to have had the opportunity to meet our amazing team full of multidisciplinary scholars and learning about the physical sciences, the social sciences, and even Indigenous artists that we will be working with on this research project. And in this planning trip, we discussed timelines for the project, we discussed logistics, define the scope, and we discussed a way to contact these communities and plan our research in a way that is beneficial not only to us, but also to the communities and the individuals there themselves. It was amazing to hear what everybody could possibly contribute to this project, but one presentation that really stood out to me was Tatiana DeGuy from the University of Vancouver, Victoria in British Columbia. And she gave a really interesting presentation about the importance of using Indigenous methodology when conducting research with these small Indigenous communities. And she spoke about things like dreaming, basket weaving, storytelling, and these are pictures of Athabascan storytelling from the Alaskan Native Knowledge Network. And she spoke that these methodologies are, well, they're something that I've never had the experience of doing, because research to me has always been like in a lab or, counting data, crunching the numbers. But having the opportunity to go and conduct research in a way that is meaningful to the communities will enable me to learn as much as I possibly can in a way that is also valuable and important to these people as well. So I also want to tell you about the independent research that I've been able to do here in BC to date about the project to prepare for my travels. I went on a trip to the Library of Congress with Drs. Nyland and Kuklima to view Indigenous maps of Alaska. We wanted to see if there are any maps made by Indigenous Alaskans, or if there were any maps with the Indigenous place names, Athabascan place names, or culturally important sites to these communities. But we only found maps made by the US government, Department of Interior, and the census. But these maps allowed us to see how the US government was changing the way they identified the geography, the people living there, and the languages spoken in these regions as well. And it was changing rapidly. So I want to show you some examples in chronological order to track those changes that we were seeing. This first map here was made by the US Coastal Survey in 1875 as a map of Indigenous populations. Keeping in mind that Alaska was purchased from Russia in 1867, here we see our areas still unexplored. And this area then was attributed to the Ayukatona people. Next, this map here is also from the same year, made by the US Coastal Survey, but a different naming convention was now used. They're referred to as the Tineh Indians. And this just shows you that these place names and the way that the US government was tracking these populations was changing incredibly rapidly. And this map, in 1920, we see another naming convention used, where the people living in what is now Nikolai and McGrath are referred to Athapascan, which is a Indigenous language group present in North America, and there are about 53 Athabascan languages. Later, in 1982, this map, which is now commonly the most cited Alaskan language map, created by the Native Peoples and Languages, the Alaska Native Language Center from the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Our study areas is defined as the Upper Kuskokwim, and they have been referring to them as Athabascan with a B instead of Athapascan with a P. And so now we're specifying that not only is this Athabascan language, but we know it is the Upper Kuskokwim dialect of this language. As part of an assignment that I did for my geovisualization and cartography class, I generated a series of infographics and maps to establish some background research on our study areas. And this here is a land cover classification of our Alaskan study areas. And for the research project Frozen Commons, I want to generate a map series that is more representative of the communities and the land in the way that they interpret it, because this is a land cover from a satellite image, but it might not be how the communities view their own land themselves. And so when I create my map series, I want to be able to incorporate any Athabascan place names, the language itself, and if I can label any culturally significant sites to these communities. And so about the Upper Kuskokwim language, we were able to find that there's only a partial record of this language left. There was an initial effort to document it by Raymond and Sally Jo Collins, husband and wife, when they visited Nikolai, Alaska in 1966. But again, it was only a partial record of it. So when I make my map series, it is important to me to go to these communities to see what kind of records and documents that they have and the kinds of maps they've been making with their historical place names and language use. So alternatively, if there is not much of a record of it, I would also be able to see how these communities have alternative ways of wayfinding. How are they getting from place to place? What places are even important to them? What kind of activities would they want to see on a map? Like, is it important to map the snowmobile route, or is it important for them to map other uses of these frozen commons and shared resources? So I want to know, how can I put it on a map? What should I put on the map? And I want to put it on the map in a way that is meaningful to them. And I learned after visiting Library of Congress and doing all the background research, whether it be climate data gaps or not enough resources in the Library of Congress for these Indigenous maps, that I can only do this if I go there myself. And just as an example, in the Upper Kuskokwim language, lake would be pronounced min. It is voiced bilabial and nasal. And in this dictionary, they have pictures, pronunciations, and a pronunciation guide, but again, not fully representative. So to reiterate, my goal and role in this project is to develop a map series that highlights frozen commons of these Arctic villages and incorporates local knowledge, place names, and culturally significant practices and geographies. I want to create a map product that is significant to these communities and not just us as researchers. Having the experience to be on the ground and learn from the local Indigenous communities is incredibly valuable and important when working with these communities. And to do so, to find adaptation strategies for resource management, it is incredibly important that we go and see how these communities are using the resources at all. But as Professor Nyland said, we did run into challenges when planning these trips. As a team, we know the value of making strong connections and building relationships with the small communities and their leaders in the villages before we get there. Outside of project planning, we have to make sure that the communities are inviting us in and that they see the benefit of the research that we are going to be doing. We had a group go out this summer, and they reiterated the importance of this connection to be stronger. And so our wonderful interdisciplinary team is going to go out again, make these stronger connections, and participate in projects like community outreach with Indigenous artists, helping create a community mural at schools. And my plans did get pushed from October to later this year, but I'm excited to be able to go when we are fully invited and anticipated, and I want to be able to have that research be meaningful to them, not just to us. With the NSF funding, my air transit will be covered, but the funds I was awarded would be used to purchase necessary gear for the Arctic, because I've never been, I don't have the type of layers that is going to be necessary. But additionally, a camera to document how these frozen commons are being used, as well as making a record to see how they change over time. And I want to extend a huge thank you to the Dymond family for making this travel and treasured educational experience possible. I can't wait to get out there and meet these communities and see the places that I've been studying remotely for the past year. So when I go to Alaska, I'll be safe, prepared, warm, and I'll be able to conduct good research, all thanks to your generosity. Thank you. questions?
And these two locations,
Mhm.
what kind of industry or occupations do they have?
A lot of it is like indigenous communities doing the subsistence. They are fishing, they are hunting, they are basically doing what they need on like a seasonal schedule in a way that uses their environment for them. Because they are so small, it's less than 1,000 in each community. But there are airports, there is travel, but I'll find out more when I'm there.
I noticed in your plan of the alphabet, there are a lot of R missing. You know, our letters are missing.
Yeah, again, there was only this partial effort in 1966 when this couple came to Nikolai, and there was another later effort, I think in the 90s. But again, this language is spoken, I think, by 40 people out of the 160 Upper Kuskokwim people that are in these communities today.
Do they use the sign language?
I don't know. I don't know.
Okay. Just curious.
Yeah.
Well, one, I can answer that. There's a sign language for every community.
Okay.
Two, you were talking about linguistics. I missed it. I'm gonna ask you about it later.
Okay.
I love
Okay. Definitely.
I was going to ask about the number of people that speak that language. Are they mostly the elders, or are they teaching it in the school, the local school there? Or?
That's a great question. So in the records that we found in the Library of Congress, we saw maps from way back when tracking the number of people speaking these languages, as well as a later transition, more recent years of who is still speaking it, which children are still speaking it, how many children are still speaking it. But there isn't like a community by community based record of that. So again, I guess that is something we can go there to find out. Yeah.
Will your research include like folklore? You know, how everything gets passed down?
Yes, definitely, because storytelling is one of the main ways that these traditions and knowledge is passed down in indigenous communities. And as Tatiana spoke to us about it, there are like so many ways that they share knowledge that is way beyond what we do with just writing academic journals and papers. So it's storytelling and like talking circles, even prayer and things like that. And that is something that our research project is trying to incorporate in our research.
I'm curious how, like, what plan you have to follow up once the map is like you have plans to like measure? Like, I don't know how you measure success like afterwards with it, but what does it look like once you make maps?
That's a good question. When we go, our priority would be in talking with the community and inferring what information they want to see on the map. This is one trip that we have, but if we were to go back, then I'm sure that we would ask like if this is a cartographic product that is at all helpful, representative, or meaningful to them, which we would definitely strive to do, but again, they know their place better.
There's two very, very small schools, larger school, very small school. Schools are our primary point of contact right now. The big emphasis is with the children. If you want to come, we'd love for you. So folks who are in October, they're having a Halloween bash. And so the big to-do is going to be working on this mural with the children to incorporate words. We have an artist from
James?
There's a suburb of Anchorage going out there trying to hear about that. But maps and products of this work and interviews, recordings, say of elders, are going to be housed in it's a museum. So actually that museum still holds all their original military. They archive a lot of the work. Very well.
Yeah.
You know, or maybe you don't until you get there and do the research. Food, is it mostly coming from within Or did they get it flown in or?
Well, I remember in our Phoenix planning trip, when we were just like trying to schedule dates to go on these trips, we had to plan around their hunting season and all that. So that takes like months at a time to hunt and then prep and then store. So yeah, it's fishing and hunting, deer season. Yeah.
How about like vegetables and fruits, things like that? Who knows? They probably have their own kind of bread, I'm sure. Thank you. Well, Joe is always so interested in food. We would have asked questions about food, right?
I can make an Alaska food blog when we go. Definitely.
Don't worry about the fruit.
So
Okay, great.
I'm taking a leap that they do not call their own towns Nikolai and McGrath. If they have a different language,
They do. They do call them
they
that.
do call them Nikolai and McGrath. Interesting.
Maybe there are like local ways of referring to their space, but on a general sense, they are Nikolai and McGrath.
You know, from your introduction, it's very apparent that you are a complete underachiever. That in the future, would you try to do more? Thank you.
Thanks, Pauline. That was wonderful. I was wondering, embarrassing that I have no idea how to make a map. I'm really good at looking at them and talking about it, but like making them is really difficult. But one of the things that I've learned from working in Indigenous communities is the way that we see space is not how they see it. And it's not that it's completely exclusive, like we share lots in common. But can you could you make a story map, for example? So one of the things I've seen in parts of Canada is that like maps aren't actually just about space, they represent stories over time. So kind of it's a different way of doing maps that I find really interesting. So I'm wondering, like, are the maps you're going to make kind of like these kinds of maps, or are you going to try to figure out ways to like, I mean, I can't even imagine how you do it. I have thoughts about it, but like, you know, if you wanted to incorporate like the stories are so important, of why a place is called the way it's called, can you make a map like I sound like I'm 1,000 years old. Like, can you make a map like multimedia? Can you click on it and something will happen?
That's definitely a goal. I want to move away from this like bird's eye view satellite interpretation, because when you're just navigating like day to day, going from your house to the river, you're not going to be thinking about it necessarily in a way that's like going north, then like taking a right. So I like making the map in a perspective that is more just like maybe like place based, like from point A to point B, but point A is like home, point B is the river. That'll be important. But additionally, like in this map, as you can see, the north arrow is actually not straight as it would be when we're just like using it for our own navigation, because the way that people interpret like villages is usually like down the river and up the river. So that's one element that I try to consider. But I would definitely want to make a map that incorporates like you said, like stories. So multimedia and story maps are a possibility, but it would just have to be like asking the communities what is the best representation and portrayal that would be useful.
I can't wait to see them.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. It's my turn to introduce the third and final underachiever of our department. I first met Elodie Nix last year, I guess, when you took my open source. What's this course called? Open Source GIS is a short name, but it has a longer name. Open Source Solutions for Geospatial Project Management. There we are. But I can never remember that, so we just call it Open Source GIS. Anyway, so I'm just going to jump into it. So Elodie comes from New York.
but she came to us by way of Chattanooga, Chattanooga, Tennessee, where she attended high school. And she's currently in her senior year, majoring in geography with a minor in GIS and sustainability. When she started to learn her GIS skills, I don't know if we had a conversation of where you sought them out or they sought you out, but she saw that she could use those skills to actually enrich her learning, but also make some money. So she, during her years up to being through a junior, she actually worked as a GIS consultant for a couple different companies. One looking at land parcels that could be used for conservation areas, and another looking for a company to want to expand their business. I think it was aquaponics, right? So she sort of, I guess, maybe saw that and said, "Hey, this is a nice nugget of work I can do and get paid at it." She also worked for her own Dr. Elizabeth Chaco as a research assistant, where she got to do some online research, transcribe community transcripts, and then also make some maps. And actually, in last year, I actually hired her myself as part of the Youth Mappers Validation Hub. So Youth Mappers is this international organization of student-led chapters, and GW is one of the founding sort of universities of that. And Joe is a big proponent of the work that we do in this open source area. And so a couple of years ago, we formed what they call a validation hub here at GW, where students hired here will actually look at and interrogate the work that other contributors are making in these various chapters around the world, and make sure the data are as accurate as they can be. Okay, so the data they're contributing to is something called OpenStreetMap, which is a collaborative mapping platform where anybody can map and sort of contribute, make the world map better. And that's something else that Joe was very fascinated with, was OpenStreetMap, because he would attend these mapathons that we would have, and often sort of be really interested in how the students are doing it and trying it himself. You can have Maddie come in and do some mapping. Yeah, you have an awesome username, absolutely. So
at your house, because it's your old house, because it was so like the middle of nowhere. So your house was taken out.
see the power of the mapper, right? You know, if you're not on there, you'll be on there before you know it. So yeah, she's been an active member of our validation hub, and as well an active member of the Humanitarian Mapping Society at GW, which was the student org that helped found the Youth Mappers program. And in fact, this year you are now a training coordinator with HMS. And HMS, of course, is another organization that Joe was a big fan of and supporter of for a time here. And so of all of this stuff that she's been doing, of course, was before she became a senior, started her senior program. So complete underachiever. I don't know where we find these students, but we got to do better. But she's not all about mapping. She is about mapping, but she's not all about it. She also very much interested in writing and in graphics. And currently, she's the layout design manager for GW's art and literary magazine, GW Capital Letters. So in preparing this introduction, I asked Elodie to send me some information about her so I would get it right. So forgive me if I'm reading some things here, make sure I want to get it correctly. And since she's been here at GW, she's been involved with various sustainability and environmental orgs and student sort of functions. And in her own words, when I asked her to explain sort of what sort of to the geography, sort of why she was attracted to geography and why she likes it so much, she said, "Geography is the most interdisciplinary field and combines my interests of environmental science, sustainability, public policy, anthropology, and technical skills, GIS, data analysis, graphic design, and cartography," which sort of pretty sums that up. And all those things that Joe loved so much. In the future, I would really like to find ways to use open source GIS, awesome, to research urban sustainability and environmental justice issues. So at this point, I'm going to stop talking because no one wants to hear from me. But at this time, I'd like to call Elodie to come up to receive her plaque. And then
Okay, excuse me, I'm a bit nervous, but I first just want to say thank you, Professor Hinton, for that introduction, and also to my friends and family for being here, either in person or via Zoom, and also to a big thank you to Maureen Dymond and the entire Dymond family for just being here, making this award possible. I'm so grateful for the opportunity that I had to travel and attend this conference that I'm going to speak about. So this past August, I had the opportunity to travel to the State of the Map conference in Florence, Italy. State of the Map is an annual event that brings together mappers and OpenStreetMap users from all over the world to discuss research projects, new technologies, and advancements in the field of open source geospatial data. After being involved with HMS and taking the open source GIS class that Professor Hinton mentioned, I became really interested in the applications of open source geospatial data for research projects, informing policy, disaster relief, and urban planning. I've always had a broad range of interests, and one thing that really appealed to me about GIS was the application of technology and spatial data in a range of fields. When I learned about the State of the Map conference, I knew it would be a great opportunity to learn more about how industry professionals and students are using OSM for their projects and fields. In my mind, I kind of organized my takeaways from this conference into roughly 3 categories, so that's how I'll try to structure my presentation. The first is, as cliche as it sounds, but the power of community. Like I previously mentioned, I've been involved with the HMS chapter at GWU and more recently as a validator for the Youth Mappers Validation Hub. Both of these experiences gave me a pathway to getting more involved on the technical side of OSM, from creating data to quality checking it. But even while I was working on these projects and knowing how useful and important the data is that I was creating, I couldn't help but feel a slight disconnect from the global Youth Mappers community at large. My first full day in Florence and the Youth Mappers was the Youth Mappers pre-conference workshop. There were around 20 to 30 Youth Mappers from around the world, and being able to meet other students who have the same interests as I do and are actively involved in their own chapter made the community feel that much more tangible and as something that existed beyond the walls of Samson's spatial analysis lab. It became a full circle moment too when I had met people who recognized me from the JOSM and validation training workshops that the Validation Hub put on. And even this morning we had a JOSM training workshop and I was able to chat via Zoom with someone that I'd met at the conference. The first day was incredibly helpful just from having familiar faces that I would see at the conference to tailored workshops that would help those of us who had never been to a conference before and make the most of it. Several of the Youth Mappers steering committee members led sessions on topics ranging from forming mentorships to creating effective data visualization and the considerations of gender inclusion in fieldwork. Throughout the conference, I was able to have many conversations with current and former Youth Mappers on their own experiences and research projects, and I drew a lot of inspiration from hearing how others were organizing their fieldwork projects using open source technologies, and even in how they are fostering a tight-knit community in their own home chapters. Near the end of the trip, Youth Mappers hosted an event for a documentary that they had created. While the film was beautifully put together, I found it really impactful to see how other students are living and overcoming community challenges through the application of geospatial data. This past summer, the Validation Hub worked extensively on using Mapillary to validate power poles throughout Sierra Leone, and while I often felt like I was in a bit of a data vacuum mapping in my apartment, this documentary showcased the tangible and profound impacts that our work and data is having on communities. About 2 weeks ago, HMS here at GW organized a documentary viewing party. It was a great way to showcase the importance of the data that we have been creating and will create throughout the rest of the semester and year. We had a great turnout, and it was a great way to kick off the semester for HMS. The formal conference was held over 3 full days, and I got to attend a range of presentations, lightning talks, workshops, and discussion groups. I think before the conference, I not had much exposure to the range of fields that use OSM and how they're using it to achieve their goals. There were several workshops that peeled back the layers on the technical side of OSM, discussing different plugins and tech developments. And I would like to clarify that I didn't have much prior knowledge on the software development side of OSM, but I found that these talks gave greater insight into what developers are trying to do going forward and how that will impact my end, the user experience. I was also able to attend a workshop and demo for R programming, which I never had much of an introduction to, but it was placed in the context of geography and geospatial data. I have since come back and begun giving myself little lessons and going online, trying to improve my skills in that sense. I was also able to help alongside Professor Hinton and Maxwell with a mapillary workshop where attendees were shown how to use RapID editor. That was something I used over the summer with the Validation Hub work. Also pictured above is a photo from a lightning talk that Maxwell and Professor Hinton did about the work of the Validation Hub. While I wish I had more time to dive into each of the talks and presentations I was able to go to, I wanted to highlight a few of my favorites. There was one presentation that discussed how one person used OSM, field papers, QGIS, and Mapillary and other open source technologies to increase and document bike accessibility and curbside management in New York City. I find urban transportation and micromobility really interesting within the realm of urban planning. So seeing how someone integrated OSM and open source technology and kind of getting a walkthrough of, it's in the top right photo, of like their own journal and notes and how they approached their research was something that was really interesting. And I couldn't help but think how that would be applied to DC. And I didn't know it at the time of the talk, but this semester in our geography senior capstone, we have begun projects about curbside management in and around DC, so it paired really well with how the presenter used open source collection methods to track the progression and improvements of New York City infrastructure with regards to bicycle ADA access and the fluid connection of bike lanes. It was really interesting to see that so many of the presentations were by OSM users whose main goal is to strengthen the OSM ecosystem, build a stronger community, and improve best practices for mappers and validators. It's really apparent that there's a strong sense of accountability and desire to make OSM be the best it can be. And the conference really enforced the value of OSM and open source data in all the different fields and sectors. Because I work with the Validation Hub and the HMS chapter GWU, it was really helpful to hear how different presenters speak on how they foster a sense of community in their own chapters, cities, and even countries. One of the reasons I ultimately chose geography and GIS as my major and minor is because I came into college very undecided about what I wanted to do, and I was interested in a variety of fields. I have found that my GIS coursework has afforded me the opportunity to study and learn about different communities and cultures all across the world in a variety of contexts, from health, environmental justice, disaster response, and transportation, just to name a few. And this conference really showed me how people in the real world, if you will, are proving that to be true and combining all of these around geospatial data. I found that this conference as well gave me a better insight into future job opportunities, career paths, and an understanding of how different fields are coming together and using open source platforms. This conference really showcased the diversity of thought, background, skill sets, and motives that people are bringing and how geography as a discipline is evolving in our lifetime. One presentation that really stood out in regard to this was by Anna Steele, who came from an anthropology and supply chain management background. Her presentation entitled Crises, Capitalism, and Communities sought to connect the individual users to wider global processes in the context and by investigating the distribution power in OSM. She posed many thought-provoking questions throughout, and many of them challenged me to think more deeply about how if OSM is viewed as a supply chain, where are the breakpoints located in it? Who should be supported? Who is visible and invisible? What kind of map is it creating? And in turn, what kind of world is it creating? This presentation was the most different from the others that I'd attended. It allowed me to reconsider the place I have as an OSM user, my work with the Validation Hub, in research projects, and within the field or within the discipline of geography as a whole. Throughout the conference, during lunch and coffee breaks, I was able to socialize and speak with other attendees, and I was able to speak to people from all over the world who came to their conference for their jobs and hear about how they're using OSM, why they're invested in the platform, and what they hope comes from it. In the evenings, there were organized social events, and though the trip started off strong with getting caught in a hailstorm with Professor Hinton and Nula at 11:30 at night, the next night I was able to attend the Hot on Summit mixer with youth mappers in the GW group. And it was a great way to get to know everyone a little bit better and speak with some folks who went to different grad schools and see like what my paths are going forward out of college. I was also pictured at the bottom, my friend Mercy, who is actually on the call this morning, getting our second round of gelato at one of the social events. As someone who cast a really wide net coming into college of my interests, it definitely has been a difficult process trying to narrow it down what I hope to do going forward. It was helpful to speak with people from all over the world in different jobs and careers that centralize around geospatial data, because I hope to orient myself in the same way. I have to say, everyone I met there was so supportive and willing to introduce me to new people, and I was really able to get a better grasp on what different routes look like going forward. Overall, the social events were some of my favorite memories from the trip, because we were able to more casually talk with each other and discuss all things geography and non-geography related. I was initially a bit nervous to go to this conference, as I didn't really know anyone except for the people coming from GWU and a few other familiar faces on Zoom. But I was able to make some really great friends and connections that I'm really thankful for. To finish things off, I wanted to highlight a few of the things and places that I got to go see when I was not at the conference. I had never been to Italy before, so I was able to visit both Florence and Rome during my time there. It was this brand new experience for me, traveling solo internationally and being in Italy. I think every day I was in Florence, I made sure to walk by the Duomo in the top right, and I would just grab a gelato and just sit there and take in the architecture and the design. It is truly, I don't even know the words for it, but standing in front of it is just amazing. I also made sure to stop by the Central Market in Florence and get some souvenirs for my family. In Rome, I flew out of Rome, so I had about 8 hours in Rome, and I tried to cram in just about every major tourist attraction that I could. I had to get it all. I've been to the Trevi Fountain, and if my inner child definitely freaked out, I grew up watching the Lizzie McGuire movie, but that was, yes, it was a great moment. And I also called my mom. My mom's on Zoom. Hi, Mom. I called her when I crossed over into the Vatican to tell her that I had crossed an international border on foot. Definitely first for that. But it was great. I probably had pasta and gelato every day, if not more than once. And I just never expected that when I declared my geography major, that I'd be welcomed into such a supportive environment of professors and students, let alone be able to travel to Italy and attend this conference. And just also meet so many geography nerds all in one place. It was amazing. So I just want to say another thank you to the Dymond family for making this possible.
What are you thinking of doing now after you graduate?
It definitely narrowed down from having 15 different things to maybe now 4. But I think the biggest thing it helped me with is I have always said if I could just go to school forever, I would love to just always be in school. But it definitely helped me get a better idea of what I want to do in grad school. And I talked with a few people that went to ITC in the Netherlands, which is all about natural resource management, and that's something that I felt really encapsulates a lot of my interests, was also focus on geospatial sciences. So I think that's the tentative plan. Who knows? It might change, but yeah.
It's great that what you get from conferences, you did, because interacting with everyone that's there is important as any of the classes or the work.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's my first conference, and every part of it, the actual presentations, but then there were workshops and the organized social events, and just being able to talk with so many people all in one room that I would never have had the ability to meet was amazing.
And if Joe were here, he would want to know how you like the food of it.
The food was amazing. I probably averaged about 1.5 servings of gelato a day. I've tried all the gelato flavors. The pasta was incredible. It was amazing. The steak, yeah, I did not try the steak. Well, maybe just a little bite. That was good.
I'm the top of the Duomo.
I did not come to the top of the Duomo.
Next time.
Next time to go by.
Talk about mapping. That view is so cool.
I was able to go to like the forgetting the name of the garden and the Piazza Michelangelo where you could see the entire view of Florence. That was beautiful.
What are you in January?
What am I doing? Oh yes. So another thing that came from this experience was I will be going to Jamaica for the Youth Mappers Summit workshop where they're having a bunch of youth mappers come in, and I'll be able to help lead a few workshops on open source technology and see some familiar faces, which is amazing.
And your heart broke into the
So sad. Great. Thank you.